What's going on, Badger fans? We are continuing to chop up that 2024 class that we all are really high on. We got Omillio Agard on the show, and this is one of the ones Justin was like, hey, save that one for me. I want to be on that one.
Yeah, he's one of my dudes. I told you that right at the beginning of the season. I watched this film the first time, and I'm like, Wisconsin does not get cornerbacks like this. Like, he would be dating back since I've been following recruiting. There's not a guy that I've watched that has this level of skill and talent that I've seen that Wisconsin has gone after.
He's so 5'10", 170, cornerback coming out of Philly. Not a consensus 4-star. 4-star on Rivals, 4-star on ESPN, 3-star on On3, 3-star on 247. I think it's probably the side. Like if you were to ask somebody there and say, hey, why is he not a 4-star? I think they would probably say he's a little shorter than we would want. I would assume that's the logic, but I think Justin and I both feel like this is a guy. I don't even feel like this is a particularly hard one. This feels like a 4-star corner. The offer list backs it up. When we're going to get into the film, I think the film backs it up. He's incredibly instinctual as a cornerback with really good athletic skills and great ball skills. I don't know what they're missing fully here.
I'm just going to be blunt. It's a bad eval, whoever does not have him as a 4-star. I've watched it. We've had other Wisconsin corners that have been at least a 4-star on one side or the other. I've never seen anyone that has his combination of, number one, after watching several interviews, seems very mature. I also think that he's a guy who has incredible short area quickness, excellent technique, and he's got pretty good burst for a guy in terms of overall speed. But I've watched him. I've never seen a corner that we've gone after before stay on a guy's hip like he does. He's got such incredible instincts.
He's on the show and he talked about that. I thought that was really impressive too. And he talked about the film study behind it. He said, I'm never going to get beat off a first move or a second move. And I was like, well, by the time they get to a third move, the pass rush gets to the quarterback and it's a win. And he's like, yeah, exactly. Like he knows it, right? He knows how the game is played. All right, let's talk about, we do this for every prospect, the 3 things we really like about him, Justin, because this is one of your dudes in this class. Not that I don't love, I love him too. But I'm going to start with you. What's the first thing that you really love about this commitment from Agard?
Well, I think it's the versatility with him, number one. I think you look at him and worst case scenario, I think he can be in a well above average slot corner. If everything goes right, I think he can be a lockdown guy on the outside. I think he's got that level of talent and instincts associated with him. So if that happens and he matures enough where he can be physically hold up against bigger receivers, he's got all the talent in the world to be a guy who can be a really difference maker on the outside.
I love the ball skills. There's so many corners, man. There's some highlights out there. Some of the picks he gets, he is like a receiver to some degree. And there's so many corners out there. We've had so many of them where, like, even if they're in the position to make the play, they don't get the head around, they don't get their hands on the ball, they don't pick it off. We both know there's no more game-changing defensive play than a big pick that maybe goes the other way, or at least changes field position. The difference between picking a ball off at the 50 or deflecting it and then they punt and you're stuck at the 10, it's enormous. He has incredible ball skills. It's one of my favorite things about his game. I think it translates. That's another thing that translates to the college level.
Yeah, I mean that, and my second thing would just be flat out technique. Like, he does an excellent job of knowing where he's supposed to be in terms of just having his body on the receiver, and he's going to be the type of guy that in coverage is going to frustrate quarterbacks because he's constantly going to be in the appropriate spot where the receiver's just not going to look open. They're going to have to really earn it or make a perfect throw.
Let me ask you this, because I feel like, and I agree with you on that point, by the way. Brian Smith agrees with you on that point, by the way. He's talked about that a bunch of times, that this guy has been coached. He knows what he's doing. I feel like when you say that, though, a lot of fans think low ceiling, right? It's almost like saying game manager, because the idea that a lot of fans have is that any cornerback can learn technique, and it doesn't come for everybody.
No, most guys do not have his level of raw physical talent, which is the differentiator. Like, you can teach a guy appropriate technique, but if he has physical limitations, he has physical limitations. You're going to be able to exploit him, even in perfect coverage. If a guy's not overly fast, or if a guy does not have, good size, if you have a 6'2" wide receiver who can run, he's probably going to get separation here and there. He's going to be able to go up above a guy who's a little bit on the shorter side. And this is a guy who's not going to have people pull away from him. Like, he will not get beat deep very often. Part of that is because in the short area, he can really make up ground in a hurry. He gets up to speed very quickly, and he has really good hips.
And with this 3-man class, right, we talked about, and by the way, we both said Harper, is underrated just because of
Yeah.
the guys he's coming in with. But let's talk Lucas. Let's talk Agard and Lucas. I've constantly said Agard feels like the safer bet to play early. Lucas probably has the higher ceiling just because he's a 6'2" guy who runs a 4.4. But I think Agard's going to play as a freshman. I really firmly believe Agard, if not, I'm not saying he's starting. I think he's firmly in the 2 deep as a freshman, man.
Yeah, Wisconsin has a slot guy coming in Selden from New Mexico State, and I'm kind of was curious off of that because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, you guys got a lot of bodies getting in that room, and I'm like, and I really think Omillio is capable of pushing that slot position. So it scares me a little bit seeing them throw out that extra scholarship potentially there, when I'm like, I think this guy can do it right off the bat. I think that'd be a mistake to throw another scholarship out there that you may or may not have to grab that guy, when I think you have a guy who's ceiling it. And honestly, his floor is incredibly high. He's a guy who I think at the very least is going to give you solid reps with a potential to be a guy who you're talking all conference type guy.
Well, Michael Mack's coming in next year too. Now he's not a slot guy, but that's just another corner body into that room.
Exactly.
All right, let's throw the film up. And as always, as we kind of talk through this, we see what he does. We talk a little bit about the offer list in the film. And Justin, you talked about it. Just he's so versatile and athletic. Here he's playing off coverage. You can see he plays just perfectly positioned. He knows exactly where that ball's going. He's always in the right spot.
Looks really fluid in his back pedal too.
Yes. No wasted steps at all.
Yeah. It looked like he's running the route on that.
Another thing, and then again, like you see the ball skills here. A lot of cornerbacks, just a ball gets chucked at them. They're 15 yards away. They don't catch that ball. Not only does he catch, he's able to turn upfield. Here you see him press coverage, able to turn and run with a bigger receiver. And again, to your point, he's running that route.
Yeah. Yeah, he knows exactly where that ball's going. You look at this, you can tell it's a high school quarterback because the throws they're going up still. It's like they've predetermined where they're throwing it. And again, there it is again. He's consistently, like, the instincts on this. Like you could tell he really trusts his eyes. And the reason you could tell he trusts his eyes is because if they throw it behind, they could pick up easy completions on it because the receivers effectively got, the short area on them. But they throw it up deep because the guy's predetermining where he's going with it. And Agard's already sitting there waiting for the ball to come. It's like he's returning punts to an extent.
Which he's doing right here, by the way.
Yeah.
Watching the film, returning punts. You love the versatility. There was a previous play where he's up at the line of scrimmage, delivers a strong jam, gets the receiver off his route. Like, he's more physical than a 5'10", 175. Like, he's got some physicality in his game. He'll hit people. He will jam at the line of scrimmage. Again, here's a great tackle at the line of scrimmage. He really brings a lot of competitiveness. You mentioned
he tackles really well for a guy who's not a huge corner.
Now, let's be honest, like, because there is no such thing outside of, like, Orlando Pace, Deion Sanders, perfect prospects.
Yeah.
He is a little undersized, and at the college level, like, he's going to bring it. I think he's going to play physical, but that will be in places a bit of a limitation.
Yeah, and that's why I said, like, he has a chance, if he's not an outside guy, to be an exceptionally good slot guy. And I think, and when I say that, I think that his ceiling is he's an NFL caliber slot guy. Like, he's that talented of a player that I could see him playing there and being a starter in the NFL at slot corner. So people need to understand when we say that it's possible that there's other guys that, like we talked about with Xavier Lucas, he's a guy who projects really well to the outside. He's 6'2", has fluid hips, get out there. I don't think he's as polished as what Agard is, but there's all the raw physical tools in the world for him. And same with Harper's, kind of similar in that regard. Another guy who has big time speed, is not quite is a little bit more raw than Lucas even, but still has a ton of upside.
Yeah, I like Harper's game a lot. The other thing too, we talk about slot corner, your third corner. That's a starter now, and that's honestly, you can make an argument because of the ability of a receiver to have a two-way go because there's more space. It's really difficult for slot corners. It's almost harder in some ways than boundary.
It's also a position that if you have a guy that's above average, it's such a huge benefit because teams will use the slot to hide good receivers. We saw it a ton this year with Marvin Harrison, the third. They dropped him in the slot because they knew they could get people off trying to press and get bodies into him, and it would be tougher to set up coverages against him. Well, if you have a guy like this who's capable of sitting on his hip, it kind of limits him a little bit.
By the way, he's also 5'10", but he's got long arms.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. He has good length for an outside.
He
for
plays a
corner.
little bigger than 5'10". All right, we're going to cut it there, kick it over to a couple different people. I think Brian Smith. I'm not sure if I have John Garcia on this one, but definitely Brian Smith talking about Omillio Agard and how high he is on him. And newsflash, it's very high. So we'll kick that over to Brian Smith. This is Omillio Agard as we continue breaking down this 2024 recruiting class.
Watch the film yourself, make your own evaluation. That being said, a couple of the other kids that I really like, Dupree, Lucas, and Agard. I know the funny thing about Agard, when he was a freshman, he was considered to be like a top 10 player in the class, but he hasn't gotten a lot bigger. Of course, you never know, like with anything else, how big a kid's going to get. He was arguably the best corner. He was technically sound and all that. He'd been coached. I think that he's one of the better guys that could come in because he's polished and play early. He could be their nickel as a freshman, or at least compete for the job. So I'm going to say him. I'm trying to think, his rankings like ridiculously low. I forget what it is, but
Omillio Agard, 4-star cornerback, 5'10", about 170, commits to Wisconsin. Great offer list, great film. You had mentioned on Twitter, I want to start here, one of the biggest gets in Badger recruiting history. Take it from there.
This is something I believe I almost from the first 30 seconds I was on your first show. Wisconsin's not moving up the ladder till they get corners and receivers that make big plays. And that's just it. And that's about recruiting, getting guys. This was a kid that we kind of brought up. I don't know how I used him as an example. It's ironic. The young man just committed to the Badgers. So thank you very much for making that convenient segue for me. But he's a kid that I knew about when he was a freshman in high school. And keep in mind, I live in Florida and he lives in Philadelphia, and I heard about it. So that puts things in perspective. Those are the kids that go historically to Miami, Florida State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Alabama, Georgia. Mm-hmm. They don't go to Wisconsin. And he could have went to Clemson, et cetera. Like, he passed up other schools, Penn State, to go play for the Badgers. From a standpoint of not only, okay, he's a good player. That's not what's in question. It's the position and it's the accolades around it. It has to eventually be, quote unquote, cool to go to Wisconsin at positions that aren't offensive line. It's just true. Wisconsin, outside of the state of Wisconsin, doesn't have a very high trajectory point with a lot of recruits because they don't, nobody's really familiar with the state, and they don't play a really exciting brand of offensive football and defense. While they've been good, it's been more in the box. Corner, you got to get guys like that if you're going to compete with the elite programs. I think he changes the dial from where Wisconsin's at and moves it up a notch, because you got to get kids like that out of other people's backyards to win. There are not a lot of corners, DNs, et cetera, coming out of Wisconsin. There's just not. So they're going to have to win these battles. Huge for the Wisconsin Badger program.
And then specifically with his film, what do you see when you pop on the film? What makes him that 4-star cornerback that built up that offer list? What's special about him?
Twitchy, man. It's straightforward. This isn't a rocket science adventure. When I watch like some of the kids that Wisconsin's gotten historically on the O-line, and they've done obviously just tremendous. So shout out to all the guys who went on to the NFL and stuff that played for the Badgers. You watch his film, and I mean, this is like from, I think the last time I really dove into his film was like sophomore, and I have no interest really going into a deep dive again. I already knew that he was twitchy enough to play man-on-man coverage. That's a good start. And number two, he'd already been trained a little bit like, this is what I want to do. It's one thing to be just rangy and athletic. Like, I know Cormani McClain very, very well. You're not going to find a physical specimen more freakish than him. He's not as crafty yet with all the little things, but he's 6'1.5" and arms, the wingspan of like 6'5" guy. Corners like that have more room for error. This kid's, if he had Cormani's size, it wouldn't be fair, but he has the ability to come in and like be a nickel right away as he gains weight and be crafty enough to handle that 5'9", 155 guy that's fast, that always gives Wisconsin fits, a guy like Swat at Ohio State. They always kill everybody, but they always kill Wisconsin. Why? Because they don't have somebody that can physically match up with. He can do that and make it cool. And his film and his name, I'm telling you, it's going to open doors for Fickell and the Badgers.
Let's talk too, because I think we're still in this habit when somebody says you could start at nickel, and people think, well, that's not really a starter. Nickel's basically a starter.
It is for like 70% of the snaps anymore in college football. I talked to a coach about that the other day. How many teams line up other than Wisconsin and Iowa?
And not Wisconsin anymore.
That's what I mean. Like, even like for the love of mankind, if Wisconsin's running the spread, everybody runs a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And the nickel, I mean, I could literally do a 2-hour show with you and not even be halfway done on what nickel means, because every freaking play is different, because who lines up in the nickel for the offensive side? It could be a tight end, it could be a fullback, big receiver, a true slot. So you got to move guys around. It is the constant chess game. But if you're thinking about a traditional slot receiver, the guy that is annoying because you know he's going to run 10 bubble screens, RPOs and all that, you better have a rabbit that can chase him. How often has Wisconsin really been where you wanted him to be at nickel corner? Let's be honest here. Once in 10 years, maybe.
Listen, I think if we're being honest, you can extend that to boundary corner. You can extend that to, we're secondary in general, where they haven't been able to match up.
And that's why they get smoked when they play a team with a real quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
They've had games where they've held teams under 100 yards rushing and got beat by double digits. It's because the teams just drop back and throw it every down. Wisconsin adding these guys like this, and the kid from Alabama, I forget his name, that's committed, another really good corner. I mean, think about that. Yeah. You start adding those pieces and they come in and have a little success. Guess what? It's not as, and I'm not picking on Cincinnati, it's not as hard to sell Madison in the Big Ten with their history and going to the Big Ten title game, it's going to Rose Bowls, all that, than Cincinnati. It's just not. They'll be able to escalate pretty quickly. It is important for Agard and some of these guys to make an impact. I grant you that. But they're going to have really good coaches there in Madison. It's going to happen. Now, I needed to see it, though, and I told you that. Like, you got to prove to me you can get some of these kids, because it's not the cool thing to go play DB at Wisconsin. It's a big deal, man.
Well, and I wanted to hit on that because I think it's a great point. I do want to put this up here, though. As I mentioned, a lot of people really enjoy the insight you bring, Brian. This is from David Palenez. Brian Smith is an absolute clinic to listen to. David, thank you for tuning in, and that is an absolute true statement. You just hit on this, and this is something that's been rattling around in my brain. Badger fans are obviously excited about this 4-star cornerback, great offer list, but you need to stack this, right? Like, Ohio State gets 2 of these guys every cycle, 1 of these guys every cycle, and better. So, to your point, maybe
you need
numbers
numbers
to seal, right? And you
that's what this is. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I know this will make people sigh and throw things at their television sets and everything else, but I'm a big guy that believes there's only 3 positions you really need to look at to kind of guesstimate the college football playoff. It's quarterback, which is just duh. With the transfer portal and all that, it's a little more murky. But then it's corner and defensive line. If you look at the NFL draft, 2016, I'll admit I lucked into this. 2016 college football playoff. There were 4 teams in it: Washington, Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State. What do they all have in common in the next NFL draft? All 4 of them had a corner or 2. They were drafted not only in the draft, but in the first 2 rounds. I mean, I get it. You got to score to win. Look at the 2 playoff games this last year. It was insane. Even Georgia got smoked. I mean, the guys are good. What you're really looking for is that one play. That pick 6, that deflected pass, that deflection from a long arm defensive lineman. You've got to, because they're gonna score. If Kirby and Nick aren't figuring out how to slow down teams from scoring, then it's probably not going to happen. They got more dudes than anybody. You still need that one play. When Alabama got beat by Georgia a couple of years ago, what was the final big play? Corner pick 6.
Yeah.
Game was over. I mean, it's not like Bryce Young gets picked on very often, but it was just a great play. That didn't have anything to do with Kirby. That guy just made a freaking play. That's where Wisconsin's got to get to. We've got dudes that can match up on the perimeter.
That's really well said.